Today's episode is brought to you by Craftsy, calling all crafters. Are you ready to dive deep into your favorite crafting projects and learn new techniques along the way? Then it's time to join Craftsy Premium membership. Take advantage of this Black Friday deal. For only $1.49, you'll receive a full year of access to expert-led tutorials, patterns, and projects in every category you can imagine. With a massive library of resources at your fingertips, you'll be able to create your best work yet and bring your crafting dreams to life. Don't wait. Sign up now at craftsyOffers.com and discover the endless possibilities of Craftsy Premium membership. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 277 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustrｙalliance.org. Today in the show, we're talking about designing fabric with my guest, Anna Maria Parry. Having grown up in a creative home, Anna Maria earned an honors BFA in drawing from the University of Tennessee in 1995 before opening a small clothing shop with her mother the same year. Designing and sewing a clothing label while managing a shop primed her for a career in textiles and small businesses. Since her first fabric collection debuted in 2005, she has designed hundreds of illustrative fabric prints that have inspired crafters and quilters around the globe. She is now the design director for Anna Maria Textiles, and sharing her distinctive quilt-making process has taken her all over the world to teach and lecture. Anna Maria's Blueprint Quilting is her fourth book, and she self-publishes an ongoing collection of sewing, quilting, and needlework patterns at annamariaparry.com. She lives with her husband and family between Franklin, Tennessee, and Sydney, Australia. Anna Maria, welcome.
Thank you, Abby. It's nice to be with you.
It's nice to have you. So I do kind of want to focus on all the new things that you're working on, but just for listeners who maybe aren't 100% familiar with your background, take us through kind of the early years and what led up to you first designing fabric in 2005.
Right. Okay. I can do that. Well, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned, I grew up in a creative home and I was sewing at a very young age alongside my mom. I was surrounded by handcrafts. So the interest was, the environment was there, but I was interested in it. Right. And so I had a lot of support, in those personal pursuits and then eventually towards professional pursuits and studying art in school. When I started at the University of Tennessee, I kind of started in the graphic design illustration program, but that was in the early years, like before everything was digital, right? Like people were still making graphic design, materials by hand with spray mount and, and X-Acto blades. And so, I was a little bit more inclined towards fine art. I was more inclined towards media that was a bit more, less commercial and more inclined towards the artist and kind of a personal expression more so than a commercial expression. And I think I chose commercial work first in terms of my educational pursuit because it sounded more like a job. But once I was kind of taking courses in both realms, I found that the graphic design world was on the brink of things becoming digital, and you can dabble on the computer if you like, but we only offer 2 classes. And so it just didn't feel like I wasn't interested in the computer, which is ironic, because I spent all my time on it now, but I was interested in just making work. And what I found in the fine art world was that developing work in a series, even if it's a group of paintings, was exactly what I would need to do, even in a commercial field. Like you take an idea and you expand it and you put it into a series, right? And so I chose to potentially go after something commercial, but to do that by educating myself on just concept, you know? And I guess that like 19-year-old me had one thing figured out, because that process of studying fine art and developing series of works is exactly what I do today, right? I create a concept for a fabric collection and I expand it into all these different pieces, much like you would a group of paintings in one gallery show, right? So that's how I was educated. And, but I took that education, and because I had so much experience designing clothes, I did that first with my mom. So I designed a clothing shop. Well, I designed a clothing line and we opened a shop for it. And I did that for 5 years. Went through some other freelance processes. And in so doing, that was discovered by Donna Wilder, who founded Free Spirit. So, um,
And what was
yeah,
the kind of initial concept of Free Spirit? Because Free Spirit has changed over the years and
a lot.
is now
Yeah.
under different ownership
Yep.
and things like that. But I
Yeah.
think it was a very novel idea at the start.
At
And
the
so
time.
what was Donna's vision and how did you
Well,
align with that?
yeah, I still consider Donna a mentor. I think that she had a wonderful vision, and at the time it was a different one, as you said. So, Donna was working within Fabric Traditions, which is a company based in New York City. And Fabric Traditions, by and large, supplies more mass market type fabric shops like Joann's or Walmart, whoever it is. They do mass market fabrics, and she was designing in house, and she had the concept to begin Free Spirit Fabrics, which wouldn't be based on fabric design, wouldn't be based on quilting fabric designs from quilters. It would be based on designs from artists. And so she was really kind
Okay.
of the first one, I'm sure, like not the only one, but the first one to build an entire imprint or a brand around the idea of stepping outside the quilting industry,
Mm.
to bring artists that may or may not have any interest or anything to do with quilting, to bring their art into the quilting world. And so it really made it more contemporary. It really made the scales larger. Like if you think of some of the, or it was very focused in kind of fresh directions, maybe compared to what was existing at the time. I think maybe an artist here or there was a little different in the community, but there hadn't yet been an entire brand that was devoted to this type of development in art, from art to fabric, right? So you think about like Amy Butler and Denise Schmidt and Heather Ross, who's in the book publishing world, or at the time she had like a pajama line, I think. And Denise was doing couture quilts, with vintage fabrics, and then she developed vintage. So whether it was artists developing from vintage documents, which Amy Butler did as well, or it was someone that was more in the illustration world, the point was they were in the on the periphery to the quilt world, and it added something to the industry that wasn't there.
And
And
how did you meet her? Where were you where you
so
got to meet her?
Yeah, so I just got lucky. I decided that after I stopped doing the clothing label, that I would work towards doing freelance partnerships. So I was bogged down with making all the goods. I decided I just want to design goods, and and partner with the company to do the making. And so I started that not in the clothing world, but I started that more like in the giftware industry. And so there's a trade show that facilitates the relationship between freelance artists and product developers, and that's called Surtex, which is short for Surface Textile Design. And I just kind of committed to doing the show 5 years in a row, whether I made money or not. I was going to set up a booth, and that this was 20 plus years ago, and it was very expensive. Even then, it was like $4,000 for a booth. That was a ton of money for someone not making any and having, like, I think I was up to kid number 5. I think I had kid number 5 by the time I went to my first show. But yeah, I was, pumping milk in the bathroom, and then going to my booth, and met Donna Wilder at my very first show in 2004, in the spring. And my art was very colorful. And I thought maybe I could get some stationery gigs, or if I'm lucky, a wallpaper, or I don't know. I didn't even know who would be walking in the booth, but a fabric person walked in. And I say fabric person because that's all I remembered was like, oh, okay, a fabric person. I need to call her. But when she asked me, are you interested in doing quilt fabrics? I thought, whether or not it was the right answer, I said, well, or she asked if I ever thought about it. And I said, no, I haven't ever thought about it because being from Knoxville, Tennessee, and what quilt fabric was to me, or the only quilt fabric that I saw, was not something that looked like my art, right? So I wasn't aware of Free Spirit. They had only been around for a couple of years. I wasn't aware of Amy Butler. I wasn't aware of the more colorful things that were happening in a couple of years. So anyway, that's my story of how I got to fabric. And it was a little
Mhm.
bit, it was intentional, but also a little accidental. Like it's very intentional to be at this show, but you never know who's going to walk in. I never stopped to think I should really seek out a quilting fabric company to work with. So I just think it's kind of interesting that I really wasn't aware that there were freelance opportunities in fabric design. I always imagined it was just kind of an on staff type thing. I did love fabric. I sewed with fabric my whole life. I was interested in print. But I think I had an affinity for it. I remember discovering repeat when I was a very young girl in church, sitting behind a widow and seeing that this little flower on her dress was the same as that flower. And then every Sunday it became a game to like try and match on the prints of the ladies in front of me, like where it happened again, that flower, you know? So like I was just inclined toward it and interested. And anyway, so yeah, I got lucky. And not just in Donna walking into my booth, but also where Free Spirit was and its timeline. Because it wasn't a very full stable of artists. There were maybe, oh gosh, maybe only 12 to 15 artists at the time. I think there's 40 now. And Donna just did such a great job of letting us be exactly who we were, but supporting our vision, but informing us artists on what quilt makers do with fabric. Um, and I got lucky that my first collection, Bohemian, did well. And so then she didn't really direct me very much. And I've really never been very directed in terms of what to make since then. So
And when it comes to designing for quilt makers, as you said, there are specific things. And if you haven't made a quilt before, I don't know if you had ever made a quilt at that
no,
moment before. Right. So if you've
no.
never made a quilt before, but you've been
I
making
take that back.
art.
I had made two patchwork quilts because of my studies in school. I did take some textile courses, but not a focus. And you're right. It's a specific thing, right? Designing for quilt makers. It's not, but so even though I knew I was designing for quilt makers, I saw it as an opportunity to like sneakily design for fashion because I was so into making clothes and was so into making print for clothes. So I think that's part of what maybe set me apart from the beginning is that the print styles were a little bit more like what you would see in dressmaking fabrics. Um, and that was intentional on my part, but it wasn't so much intentional as like, I'm going to show quilters how to design with this, you know, because I honestly, like, I didn't have any frame of reference for what that first collection would do for me for the second one or for my career. I really envisioned that first fabric collection and maybe a subsequent one as one of very many types of products that I would design. By the
Sure.
time those first goods came out, I actually had, I think, like 24 different contracts from anything from like greeting
Oh,
cards or paper napkins or like a random assortment of things that really wasn't meaningful in terms of presenting me as a brand. It was just a lot of freelance work on one little thing or another. But the fabrics were the first thing that really felt like, and maybe just because of the physical space that 20 bolts takes up, you know, the fabrics were the first thing that really felt like, wow, this is a real like sort of presentation of a style and a brand and that I hadn't had the opportunity for prior to that. And so it was cool, but I never made a I was not surrounded by quilts. Like there was so much handcraft in my family history, but quilt making was not part of my family history. And in fact, I open my new patchwork book by saying like there is no quilt in any traceable generation of my family. Everything else, but not quilt making. And so I had no exposure other than,
mhm.
you know, what I might see at the county fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. And those those didn't look like the quilts that I make. you know?
Right.
So,
So there's a lot of learning that must have had to take place
yes,
because, as you said, now you design everything on the computer. You're on the computer all day long. But when you were in school, you weren't interested in the computer. So
no,
clearly you had to teach yourself
yes.
skills there as well as teach yourself because now you're a wonderful quilt maker. You make gorgeous quilts. So
Thanks, Abby.
there must have been a lot. Well, I think everybody would agree. But there must have been a lot of learning also on how to make quilts because, making a quilt, it requires a lot of skill to make an expert quilt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think just like sort of the accidentally landing in quilting design, but kind of really thinking a little bit more about fashion in terms of what I was interested in making the fabric look like. I feel like in the quilt making realm, I'm thinking about art and what I want to make the quilt look like, like I'm thinking about the visual space as a quilt not horribly differently than I would think about a canvas and what can happen on it. So for those reasons in the beginning and even still, my true love in making quilts comes from certainly honoring, the traditions in quilt making and lots of traditional methods and images, if you will. But that's how I think of quilt is it's an image. And I think of a log cabin block as a geometric image, and I think of applique as an opportunity for irregular organic shapes, and so I think that's why my leaning is so strong towards applique. But my true love is that combination of where I can take those very traditional patchwork sensibilities and combine them with sort of an organic movement that feels like a composition in the end. So there's those like true love quilts, and then there's this place in the middle where I need to make it teachable, because this is an industry that's about education, right? Because other people are taking part. I'm not just hanging these quilts up and selling them, am I? I'm hanging them up and encouraging people to do similar or the same as what I've made. And so there's a certain amount of shift that my brain goes through to make this thing a pattern that is repeatable. And then there's some things that are even more simplified still, where it's just me sort of experimenting with traditional forms and repetitive block style quilts. But in the beginning, I was not highly interested in a repetitive block style quilt. I just I think that I'm just a personality type or an artist type that when I see it and I get it, I'm already done with it. You know, I need to feel like I'm contributing something that wasn't there before. you know, I need to feel like I mean, I want there to be a reason for people to approach or work with my quilts or like my quilts because maybe it's something they hadn't thought of before, seen before. So, um,
Right. Okay. Yeah. No,
yeah.
that makes total sense. I want to take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Craftsy. And here is a message from Craftsy. At Craftsy, we know making. Whether you're new to the handmade life or looking to advance your skills, we have classes for all maker levels and interests. From knitting and sewing to quilting and embroidery, cooking, baking, paper crafts, and more, Craftsy's instructors guide and encourage you, empowering you to turn ideas into realities. And they have an exclusive offer for Craft Industry Alliance podcast listeners. Right now, you can get a whole year of their premium membership for only $1.49 as part of Craftsy's Black Friday deal. Visit CraftsYOffers.com to sign up, and the discount will be automatically applied at checkout. For only $1.49, you'll get a full year of access to over 2,000 premium full-length classes. Take your craft to new levels with Craftsy. If you're an absolute beginner, Craftsy's instructors help build strong foundations as they teach, setting you up for success and helping you fix mistakes as you go. Their enthusiasm and strong teaching style make learning accessible to all. If you're an experienced maker, Craftsy is for you too. From perfecting your fondant skills to tackling complex stitches, from eye-catching garden design to next steps in sourdough, Craftsy has advanced classes in all crafts from instructors who are experts in their field. With over 2,000 classes, including downloadable patterns and recipes, Craftsy has a class and a craft for everyone. Visit craftsyoffers.com today and get a year of Craftsy premium membership for just $1.49. Don't miss out on 99% off for the entire year. Start turning ideas into projects you can be proud of. Get this exclusive offer at craftsyoffers.com. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now, back to my interview with Anna Maria. And then you opened up another brick and mortar shop. So this would, you opened
Years
Craft
later.
South.
Yeah.
Years later.
20 years later. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So
and do you know that I signed the contract for Craft South on the same day that I signed the contract on that shop with my mom, the same day on August.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was my mother's Saint's Day, St. Mary. And I just happened to, I think it was 19 years later to the day that, and my mother had passed away at this point, but my mom and I did the clothing shop together in 95. And then 19 years later, I signed that contract on the building.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's cool. Yeah.
But
that's
I did.
Really cool.
I did that. And I said I never would, but I did.
So what was the thinking behind opening another brick and mortar store and having a store be part of the portfolio?
Education. Education was the first goal for that shop, is to provide a place for people to come and learn and be inspired. I think that no one opens a quilt shop to get rich. No one even opens a quilt shop necessarily to earn an income.
So true.
I mean, if we're honest,
it's a low margin business. It's a tough
low margin business. And like I say this a lot when I talk about it with colleagues and other shop owners, and I don't have my brick and mortar anymore. I let that go a couple of years ago, but I loved it. But you take the price per square foot model of business, where how much, or not price per square foot, sales per square foot, how much money are you making per square foot of your shop, right? You think of something like an Apple store that sells an iPod or a phone or whatever it is, or AirPods that are like this big, right? They take up 2 or 3 inches and they sell for like 500, 600, 800, like whatever they sell for. And then you take a bolt of fabric, right? That's 25 inches long, 10 inches wide, 3, 4 inches thick. And that whole value is only like, maybe $180 on the bolt. Yep. And so, I mean, it's a sales per square foot issue as well. And the cost of goods, of course, is continually rising. And a lot of people take issue with that. But I mean, the cost of all goods are rising. But when you think about what it takes to stock and run a fabric store and what people are making for those goods, it starts out as a dicey endeavor, right? And so really you do need to sort of pad that income with a few revenue streams, and that wasn't necessarily like, I knew that was a necessary thing. But really I just wanted a space. I had been traveling a lot. I have a tendency to start 5 different directions of conversation all at one time, so I apologize. But I mean, going back to like what my thinking was, I was kind of aware of the financial implications of, renting a building and paying a staff and putting like $250,000 in inventory in it, and I did sort of know, like, this would just be an investment, not just in my career, but it would be an investment in the craft community in Nashville. And I really wanted that. I'm not saying that I was running a charity, but it was important to me to invest in the community. And we were pretty low in Nashville, I'll be honest. I wasn't going out there and competing with any fabric shop in Nashville, Tennessee, because they weren't existent, really, not the type of shop that Craft South is or was. So there wasn't another, I mean, the quilt shops, I think, were a little ways away, the couple that we had. And so like, I also had been traveling a lot at the time. And I thought, well, when I go travel, say I land in Portland, Oregon to teach, people have come from all sorts of cities to come be with me in Portland. I'm like, if people are going to travel anyway to go to where my classes are, how about I just stay home and I
Right.
can, and I can teach there. So I was setting up a teaching space for myself as well. But I also brought in everyone I was interested in bringing in. You know what I mean? So we had a continual. It wasn't just the day-to-day classes in all sorts of disciplines, of course, quilt making, garment making, accessory making, knitting, crochet, weaving. We did all sorts, embroidery, but with wonderful staff, like wonderful staff. I still miss all those women so much, but we're also bringing in people from all over the world. We're bringing in Kathy Dowdy, Jen Kingwell, Rita Kunaraj, Kay Fawcett. You know, we had a continual stream of bringing in international and national guests as well. So I felt that was very special and important to do.
And then your relationship at Free Spirit changed too, because you took on kind of a new initiative where you were bringing in outside artists and create maybe who also didn't work in the quilting
That's
industry
right.
traditionally
Yes.
and helping to create fabric from their artwork. And you sort of became in that way an art director. So talk about that sort of initiative
Yeah.
and period.
So, Conservatory Craft took a page right out of my friend Donna Wilder's book.
Right.
And in terms of pulling in artists into the fold of quilt fabrics that were not quilt makers. And truly, it was just women that I admired and had for years. And so I pitched it to Free Spirit, who by this time was on their second ownership. A few years after I started, they sold Fabric Traditions to Westminster Fibers,
Right.
um, which is under the Coates umbrella,
Mm-hmm.
Coates and Clark umbrella. And that's when Rowan from like, you know, because Amy had left Free Spirit and went to Rowan, and then she got right back in there because like everybody merged again, and Cave came in there over to the Free Spirit side. But so there was a lot of shifting going on business wise. But and we went through a couple art directors um, there, but I had pitched the idea of getting a handful of artists' work into the portfolio so that I could work with it and present other goods. And I think that that was
Mm-hmm.
largely inspired by becoming a buyer for my shop. I still found that there were
Okay.
holes.
Yeah.
I still found there were holes because really, like as a fabric designer, I think actually one of the things that has contributed to my success is that I really kind of keep my head down. I don't pay attention to much. I certainly have friends in the industry and colleagues, and I go to market, but I'm not searching around and looking at other quilt fabrics to get inspired to make quilt fabrics. You know what I mean? Like I look at all sorts of art sources, fashion sources, you know, like historical sources or personal ones, but nature. But it was interesting to suddenly become a buyer for my shop because then I was seeing everything, you know,
Right.
and I kind
Sure.
of didn't want to in a weird way. I sort of
Right.
like
Yeah.
didn't want to. And it was kind of hard as a fabric designer to buy fabric because I kind of in my brain, just in own, my own self-critiquing engine was always running. And I'd be like, I just wish that pink were a little more, you know what I mean? Like in someone else's fabric, you know? And so it was an interesting process, but on the whole, I found that there was still more that could be available to quilt
Mm.
makers. And so I had the idea to do that, and I pitched it to Free Spirit, and they were receptive, and we had kind of built a programming plan around it and the launch, and in the midst of that, we got sold again.
Right. So,
The
Coates was going to just basically, if I'm remembering correctly,
they let the bottom drop out. Yeah,
shut
they
down Free
yes,
Spirit. They
that's
they
right.
were ready to let it go,
That's
and
right.
they made an announcement. The end. The end, and
That's right.
then it was bought out of that.
It was bought out of that. So Coates was gonna like Free Spirit was this little tiny pimple on their rear. You know what
Right.
I mean? It was like, I mean, because
Because
Coates is a
you're
massive business and Free Spirit was the
right.
only independent
selling
or brand.
fabrics to these independent stores,
That's
which is
right.
small if you
It's
think about,
small. It's really
yeah,
small. It feels big to all of us that are in it every
but
day,
it's
but it's
not.
in the grand scheme of things and the worldwide selling of cones of thread that Coates and Clark does into like the manufacturing industry. It is a very small endeavor and it's a fussy one because you have all these designers, and you've got all these royalties, and you've got all these contracts, and you've got these shows, and the shops want this, and the reps want that, you know? So as a model, it didn't match with Coates, and it never did, to be honest. You know, they're a very corporate entity. And
Yeah.
there aren't that many corporations in our industry. They're mostly family owned businesses. There's a few, certainly, that also service the mass industry. But when we're talking fabric companies, they tend to be family owned, kind of legacy businesses, right?
Mhm.
So it was unique in that sense, that we were owned by a corporation. But we woke up to the news that Free Spirit was no more. We didn't get any advance notice as artists. So that was an interesting time. I felt pretty confident I could get a fabric gig somewhere, but I was like, how is Free Spirit just gone? You know, like
Yeah,
I've
people
been,
were in mourning. It was a
yeah,
yeah.
it was weird, but um, they eked it out and they sold to the Jaftex Corporation, who we have been with now for, I shouldn't say we anymore since I have a new contract, but I can't remember the year. I think it was 2017 or 18.
Somewhere in
Jaftex
there. Yeah.
purchased. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
but, and that's who they've been with ever since. And so, it's continually changing, you know, ownership style. I mean, while every new owner of Free Spirit makes an attempt for it to be what that original vision was, and a lot of that is intact, it can't help but change over the course of time. Any business can't help it with change over the course of time, even with the same owners, but particularly with a new ownership style, it continued to change. And I continued to, you know, ride that out and just keep my head down and do my thing.
Right.
But fortunately, um, you know, the new owners were, after some conversation, receptive to letting me continue with conservatory. And so I did bring that to market in 2018. And it's been a wonderful project. And it was something that I always viewed as a project. It wasn't
Mm.
something that I thought I was just going to shift my whole career to being an art director and managing other designers, because I loved it because I respected their work so much. And I liked what it added to our shop. I liked what it added to my
Right.
projects. I liked what it added to just my work in general and thinking outside my own head a little bit. And I liked the role of kind of directing and coloring and scaling other people's work. I really felt very, very comfortable doing that because I felt like I had learned how to speak that translation from art to fabric.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a special skill and one that would be needed in this context. So, okay, so now you've moved to Northcott. You have a
Yeah.
new role there, which is
Yes.
exciting. And so maybe talk a little bit. I mean, you're not the only designer who's moved fabric companies. It's actually fairly common.
Very common.
Almost everyone.
In fact, staying as long as I had at Free Spirit is
Is
uncommon.
unusual.
That's right.
Exactly. And
Yes.
so, but I think that people may not understand why people do that, why
Hmm.
designers do that. And so talk a little bit about that decision and then also about what the new initiative's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Last year, my contract with Free Spirit was set to be up at the end of 2023 in December. And in June, it was time. In June of last year, it was time to make the decision of what I was going to do. And I had decided to step back from my contract. You know, for a lot of reasons that really aren't especially meaningful to anyone listening to this, maybe, you know, just, you know, I do think that the environment that I was in, it no longer really, I needed a change, I think is the simplest way to say it. I needed a change. I think that the shifting model of the industry post COVID, and, and and the shifting model within Free Spirit itself was something that I guess I just didn't feel like I was comfortable experimenting and doing different things. And I really didn't have any for the first time in my life, I was actually kind of stuck. I'm a really pretty decisive person, and I
Yeah.
usually have more ideas than I know what to do with or have the time to see through. But I was stuck, Abby. Like, I just
Mm.
was like, I know something needs to change. I'm not sure if it's me or them or both. And I had lots of conversations about kind of shifting one thing or another, but at the end of the day, I finally just decided like I need to make a change. And so I decided to step back and not renew my contract. Now, I decided to not renew um, during a time that my fabric was selling amazingly, like ever since COVID, like COVID had this huge rise of sales
Yeah.
for everyone because we were all at home
Yeah.
baking, but my sales still like had stayed really solid, and it really wasn't a performance thing. Um, but I made a decision to step back without knowing what I was going to do. And I thought, oh, I've started writing this book. I'll just take a year off. Um, I'll just take a year off and write my book and give it a good think. I told like two people, my husband, my daughter, and one other friend that I had decided to not sign. And but out of nowhere, a few months later, I happened to get a letter from Tassine, the president of Northcott, just out of the gate offering me my own division. Um, and which would be, facilitated, supported, printed, and distributed by Northcott, but be its own freestanding brand, where I would be design director and basically increase my offerings from, I mean, I think my average SKUs, like item numbers per year with Free Spirit, have been kind of like two full collections plus usually like a reprint or a legacy or something in there that's different, or a lawn. So like maybe over the course of the year, I have like 65 to 90 SKUs total over the course of the year with Free Spirit. And I've been doing that same thing for years. This would increase my offerings. His goal was 300 SKUs a year.
Wow.
So I was like, that sounds like a lot of work, you know, but I also had the opportunity to get back into many different types of cloth again, too, like a much more, they were much more receptive to me experimenting with types of cloth that had different textures, sensibility, printed or woven in different parts of the world, different end uses, or a myriad of end uses, um, and a willingness to sell those without the expectation that it's going to be the deepest sale of anything in the world. I think I came from a place where like we were always going for like this mass volume for every single SKU, and I had great per SKU performance, but I always felt that there was so much more opportunity to really grow my brand and sensibilities and help people make quilts like I make quilts if I could offer different things too, that increase the texture, increase the interest beyond just printed goods. I hope I'm making
Yeah.
sense. So
Yeah.
anyway, like I
100%.
I I got to call those shots. And what I was a little intimidated by in the offer. Now I sent back a 4-page spreadsheet of questions.
That's
Okay.
amazing. And I think also inspiring because I often hear from small business owners who get an offer, maybe something super exciting and flattering like this one was, and
Very
are
flattering,
afraid and
absolutely.
are
But
afraid
I
to
don't
write
flatter
back.
easily. I do not flatter
They're
easily.
afraid to ask questions is what I'm
Oh
trying to
my
say.
God.
Like, and I think that it's encouraging to know that someone who has, so much of a following that you have still needs to ask a lot of questions. And in fact, is in a better position even to ask a lot
You
of
can assume
questions.
nothing. You can assume nothing in these offers. And I don't even think that I ask questions not because I assume that someone's out to get me, but I
Right.
assume that maybe they haven't even thought of that level of detail yet. And we need to talk about it. And so we both land in the same place, because I do think that contracts can go wrong when it wasn't discussed. And one person
Right.
made an assumption that wasn't the same as what the other person assumed, or it was just never dealt with. And so then when something goes bad, and look, we sign contracts to avoid things going bad. And
Correct.
it's too often that people are afraid that they're going to lose face by asking hard questions like, who owns the URL annamariatextiles.com? Like, I want to own that. I want to always own that. These sorts of things. Like,
Yeah.
I'll lease it to you. I'll let you use it, but it's my URL, right? So, like things like that. And every other thing on my 4-page list of questions by category, because I have become an artist, a design director, a wholesaler, a content creator, a pattern writer, a book writer. You know what I mean? So my involvement level with any fabric company that I work with is complex now. I have multiple roles with the fabric company, and he was actually encouraging me to add on other roles. I'm now the person that speaks directly to the mills instead of having a director above me and an engraving specialist alongside the director having the conversations with the mill agents. It's me now. Like I jump right over those people I've been working with and people that I've loved for years to work with. That was my team at Free Spirit. But I do think that Tassine was really smart to realize that I was probably capable of doing
Yeah.
those parts of the role. And
And that's what made it exciting for you again.
it did. And I didn't know I needed that. I didn't know that I needed to really fully engage everything I was capable of. And it just felt really good. And actually just saves me so much time. It saves me so much time because like when I'm working on a collection, the conversation is between 4 people. Used to be. Now, when I'm working on a collection, it's just me and the mill. That's it.
Hmm.
I don't talk to anyone about Northcott about my collections. I just pop them in there and say, here it is. And they shoot it to the mill. But then the conversation is between me and the mill, but they're there for support. So for me, as long as I've been doing this, it's the perfect arrangement because like I like to just get to it and not sit and have 4-hour conversations about color chips because I know what I want to tell the mill. So I can just tell the
Yeah.
mill, you know. And then but if I need the support, they're running 4 other divisions and they have a full, wonderful, capable staff where if I need to ask a question, I ask the question. But like I'm assigning the SKU numbers, I'm assigning the color names, I'm catching up to being up to date on how to do all those things. But there's a lot more clerical things involved with it now since I'm managing and archiving all of it. But suffice it to say, I love my new job. I've been doing it since January, and it just feels really right for me now, at this stage of my life
Yeah.
and
And kudos
career.
to Northcott for being able to look outside or think outside the box, right? To be able
Yeah.
to sort of recognize that there was a possibility here and that you were capable of this and that you could turn this into something that would be really remarkable and maybe something different from what anyone else has done and
Yeah.
really new.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know I mean, I know that it's the first time I've done it, so that's different, right?
Sure.
So, I feel like, that SKU number, that SKU count, I felt now that includes everything, not just pieces of fabric, but also like bundles or fat quarter sets or charms or like whatever it is. So like total number of SKUs a year, the goal is like 300, which basically means I'm shipping something every month. Okay. So like I basically have a collection that ships every single month, but I can also hire another artist to design for Anna Maria Textiles. And so, um, my oldest daughter, Juliana, has been working alongside me for almost 2 years now in the studio. And so she's taking on a marketing role and doing a lot of content creation for us, but she's also starting to take on a design role too, and will be contributing some collections. In fact, she worked for Fabric Traditions for Donna Wilder when she was in school at Pratt in New York, like
Oh my
I don't know
gosh.
how many years ago. So like 12 years ago. Is that right? Yeah. So she was like 20 and Donna was like, hey, Juliana's in New York. Does she want to does she want a job? And I'm like, sure, she wants a job. So she went into the office and they were like, oh, you're such a good artist. Do you want to try some fabric design? And she was like, sure. And so Juliana had lines of fabric in Joann's for about a year or so when she was like
Amazing.
20. And I was like, girl, I was like 35, like 36. And that's even young in our industry to start,
Right.
So that's pretty lovely. But I guess the short story is with the new brand, I have a lot of control, which I love. I have a lot of freedom, which I really love. But with that, I also have a lot of support. And I think that creatively, what it's doing for me, and I guess what the quilter can take from all of it is there's just more choices. And I'm kind of feeling like I get to finish a sentence. Like when I create a collection of fabric, we talked about like what does it mean to make a quilt fabric collection, right? And like what do quilters need? Like you need the large scale print, the medium, the small, the geometric, right? There's like this whole mix. And there's that sort of formula. And I think what this
Yeah.
is and I've hit that formula every single time, like every
Right.
season I do that
Yep. Yep.
Sometimes I veer off it and people go, what? And I'm like, okay, formula. But
Yeah.
I got it. I got it. Here's more formula. But I feel like what this is allowing me to do is kind of create simultaneous libraries of different types of prints. So, for instance, like a
Mm,
whole yarn dye collection, but we're going to keep doing new yarn dyes, right? So that's one engine running. And then
I see.
tiny scale that I've never done. So
Yeah.
I'm doing tiny scale. I've never done tiny scale. That's a whole library. And then, of course, my larger illustrative floral prints that people are very used to. Of course, I'm interjecting that. And then soft, pale toned, low volume things that I've never done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love it's just not like what people expect from me, you
Right.
know. But now I sort of have this realm where I can sort of instead of doing one or two pieces, I can kind of fully do a thing.
Yeah, which is very
So
exciting. And let's
it
talk a
is.
little bit about the book. So, this
Yes,
is your fourth book, and the book, it sounds like, came about prior to this new opportunity at
yes,
Northcutt. So,
it did.
what was the sort of impetus to write another book? How did you connect? I think it's with Quarry. How did you connect
Mhm.
with them? And what is the sort of premise of this new one?
Yes. So it's called Anna Maria's Blueprint Quilting. And I had been, gosh, on and off contacted by Corey for a very good while before we finally kind of sat down and had a chat. A couple of years. And I've written 3 books, but I haven't written a quilt making book until now. So I had done a general sewing book, a baby sewing book, and an embroidery book, a handwork
Okay.
book. But the last book, excuse me, the third book was it published in 2012,
Right. So that was a
a
long time
long
ago. And
time ago.
publishing was very different, by the way. In
Yes,
2012, craft publishing was at a certain phase, which it is not at now.
that is correct. So I knew that the next book I wanted to write was a quilt making book, but I knew I didn't want to do it anytime soon because I had produced those other 3 books every other year in a row. So late 2008, 2010, 2012.
It's a ton
And
of work.
so much work. And then like I opened a shop and had another baby, I think. Yeah, had another baby and got a divorce,
You have
moved
seven
house. I
children.
have 7 kids. Yes.
Right.
The
Just
youngest
to
is
be clear.
yeah, yeah. Let's just clear that up. So the oldest is 32. The oldest is 32. The youngest is 11. And I got all sorts in the middle, but most are adults now. So yeah, a lot of life and work has happened since that time. And so I would develop an idea for a quilt book, set it aside, develop an idea, set it aside.
Sure.
And it honestly wasn't until I really through the process of education, again, education is kind of like at the center, I think, of all that we do in this industry. And it's really the focus of what I do. Apart from being creative, I am educating or I'm attempting to. And throughout the courses that I have taught over the years around the world, teaching my process of quilt making hasn't just taught my students, but it's also taught me what it is I'm doing when I design quilts and not just what my method for applique is. Why do I choose these colors? But what my process is when I'm designing the quilt space as a whole, kind of going back to that conversation about composition and seeing the quilt as an image. What I realized is my process is actually maybe quite opposite to what most people might presume. My process at the beginning of designing a quilt has nothing to do with color. It has nothing to do with fabric. I'm not even thinking about it. Unless I'm making a collection quilt that's supposed to show off a collection of fabric, but that's like another quilt. I don't consider that. Sometimes I fall in love with them, but I don't consider those really personal quilts. Those are feature quilts, right? But when I'm creating a personal quilt to suit my creative intentions, um, I'm really always, and it took me years to really discover this about myself, but I'm only thinking about the layout and structure of the thing and what kind of shape it's going to take, right? Like, is the format going to be kind of laid out in an X? Is it going to lay out in kind of like three vertical columns? Is it going to be a concentric square? Or is it going to follow the movement of color like a color study painting, pass from one color to another with its own movement? And like these few quote blueprints, which I accidentally just stumbled on the word when I was like describing it in a lecture, I really only move through a handful of these structures, if you will. But when I draw it out on a piece of paper, which I always do, I start my quilt making by drawing with pencil on graph paper. And maybe I'll lay in the value positions of the quilt where things will be lighter and where they will be darker, but not until I truly have the structure down to the blocks and how they're sitting in the grid, whether on point or on uh, grid, whether it's panels of patchwork and applique or blocks of patchwork and applique, how they come together. But like not until I have that drawing done do I ever start to look at fabrics and where they're going to sit. And I realized that what I'm doing is actually very highly organized.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, therefore, it's very teachable. It's not just this
Right.
big
Right. You
Jackson
have these
Pollock
blueprints.
throwing it and
Yeah.
figuring it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd love to be that artistic. I'm not. I have to plan it. you know, I'm really not. That's probably why I'm not a painter full time. I love painting, but that's probably what keeps me from doing that from a living. Like I do like order. And I realize that even though the resulting quilt might feel very complex and layered and spontaneous, it's not. It's very ordered from the beginning. And I felt like, well, this is teachable, and
Right.
while I
So
don't
that was
think
the concept. Yeah.
and so like I don't think I'm doing anything highly different than what anyone else is doing, but I do think it's an interesting perspective to teach
Mm-hmm.
from. So in other words, like take everything you already know. I don't need to teach you how to make a log cabin. You know how to do that. And I'm not going to, like there's all these traditional block styles, and I probably only use 10 to 12 different blocks over and over again. I probably only use 3 to 5 different structures over and over again. But it's organizing that structure and then
Yeah.
expanding upon it that I think was the perspective that I really wanted to teach my quilts from, because
And
I've
it's
been
so
told,
helpful. Yeah.
well, I hope so. I really hope so, Abby, because I get told all the time how hard my quilts are. And your fabric is hard to use. Your quilts look hard, and I'm like, I don't know if hard is really the word. Like, I think that I always say that trying is the most advanced skill. Well, I don't always say it. I'm starting to say that. Trying is the most advanced skill. Like being an needle turn applicator for 40 years, that's not an advanced skill. That's practice. That's just time, right? But trying is also an advanced skill, right? So you have to be willing to try. And so I've organized the book um like if you're wanting to make the quilt, right? so like I the only thing that makes me sad as an educator is when I hear someone say, I really want to do that one, but I just can't, or like I won't let myself try that. And so I
Mm.
organize the book so that with each of the 4 structures that I present, I give you 4 projects for each one. And the first one is the most straightforward and only is patchwork. The second one adds a little applique. And then the third one has kind of much more complex layering of applique and color work, sort of more diversity of patchwork and applique styles, probably. So most time intensive, but not harder, just takes longer, right?
Right.
So, but hopefully, like my goal with that is, I mean, it's not rocket science. What the goal is to having multiple levels of
Sure.
projects in the book, but it isn't only so, okay, all the beginners that buy the book are just going to make these beginner versions and all the advanced quilters the goal is to come like meet you where you are and encourage you to move through some of these more
Yeah.
complex processes as you build your skills.
And get that practice. I mean,
That's right.
that's where it comes from. So that sounds great. And I hope people will go check it out. We'll definitely link to it in the show notes. And before we move to your recommendations, I just wanted to touch on your last name. So you had always been known, at least as far as I knew you,
Yes.
as Anna Maria Horner.
Yes.
And that was a long, long stretch.
Yes.
And when you have like
I've been
a
I was a
business,
Horner longer than I was a Democopoulos, which is what I was born.
and when you have a business that's based on your name, which your business is,
Yeah.
it can be a pretty big risk to change your name. So,
Yeah,
and you got remarried, and that's
I
why your
did.
name changed,
That's right.
which is completely normal and understandable. But to
Yes.
change your business name feels to me at least like a big risk. So, talk about
Yeah.
the process that you went through to do that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. So I was divorced in 2018, 19. And I did what a lot of people do. I kept my name not just because of my business, but also like it kind of made it easier for me to have the same last name as my family, as my children, right? Having young kids in school, I don't know, I kind of left it there. And I did think about going back to my maiden name, Democopoulos, which is such a mouthful, but at least legally, but I did understand that the brand name would be in place for a long time. However, my logo has never had my last name in it. It's only had Anna Maria. And when I divorced or knew I was going to, I think I had filed, I updated my selvages to only have the logo and no longer say Anna Maria Horner. So I've kind of been slowly like making the shift so that visually it would always be. In fact, I did that in 2001 when I designed my logo. Like the visually it was always Anna Maria. The website was Anna Maria Horner. Anna Maria wasn't available, or it was an island in Florida, or a porn star. I can't remember, probably both. But the decision, like I got married a year and a half ago. My legal name changed officially at the beginning of this year. I might have bought the domain Anna Maria Parry just before Vince proposed, but I knew it was coming. um, but so, you know, that when people what I think what's harder to undo than Anna Maria Parry, or sorry, than Anna Maria Horner, is the AMH, because people write AMH all over the place. You know what I mean? Like when people, like, at least on social media, instead of writing it all out, people say AMH or whatever. So like now it's AMP, but I have no expectation that I will catch everyone up, and I'm 100% fine with that. Like I will be changing the URL to Anna Maria Parry, but I'll always own the Anna Maria Horner, and both will point to the website, but the
Right.
field will always. But I mean, I did that when I had a Craft South website, a conservatory craft website, and an Anna Maria Horner website, and I merged those all into one place. So any one of those URLs you enter, you land in the same place. And
Right.
so it's going to be the same for Anna Maria Parry, but that's what the website will say going forward. And that's what I mean. It's kind of like I have to write that because that's my legal name. When a guild pays me for a lecture, I have to give them Anna
Right.
Maria Parry. You know what I mean? Because it's my legal name. It's how I file taxes now. It's how I have the LLC for Anna Maria Textiles. So it's like what I'm going to use, but I have full tolerance for people never catching on to that.
Mhm.
You know what I'm
Right, right.
saying?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's helpful to hear. So just because I
Yeah.
know people out there have definitely noticed the change, so I think it's good to,
Yes. And it's
explain
already
it.
taken
Yeah.
on Instagram, which is kind of a bummer, Anna Maria Parry. So I've got to
Mm.
figure that out. And they won't let me change
Oh,
because I'm verified. So I have to go through a whole process. But again, like
wow.
when you're old like me, it takes a long time to change your life because your name's in a lot of places.
It is. It's a huge
But
job.
it's kind of a
So,
good, it's coming at a good time, because I have a new fabric environment and world, and that's
right,
just Anna Maria
right.
Textiles. Again, doesn't have the surname. And so like it's coming at a fine time. So
Yeah, yeah, totally. Okay. I want to get to your recommendations. So
yeah.
you listen to audiobooks while you
Yep.
work. You have a couple of favorites: Everything, Nothing, Someone, Sociopath,
Yes.
and Marriage Portrait were three of
Yes.
those.
All very different and all very good. I actually mentioned the first book, Everything, Nothing, Someone, is by Alice Carriere. I think how you pronounce her name. I can't. I don't know for sure. I've never said it out loud, so now I feel like an idiot. But she is the daughter of an artist that I followed from a young age named Jennifer Bartlett. Jennifer Bartlett was a very well-known New York artist that I was introduced to, and I actually mentioned in the intro to my book. I mentioned Jennifer Bartlett, and in looking up something about Jennifer Bartlett to make this reference in my introduction, I found that her daughter had written a memoir about being born Jennifer Bartlett's daughter and what it was like to grow up
Oh,
in that world. And I was like, what is this? And so Jennifer Bartlett has left this world, but her daughter's memoir is a really beautiful one. So that's what that
that's
is.
great. Yeah. Oh,
And
I
then
love that.
yeah, it was really cool. I liked I sympathize for my children reading a listening to a memoir of children that are raised by artists. I was
Right.
like,
No,
oh my God.
100%.
Oh my God. And then I probably got recommended the next one called Sociopath, because of reading that memoir, because Sociopath is a memoir by a woman who is a clinical sociopath, but is also a psychologist treating them. And it's a
Oh,
fascinating
wow.
book. And it details her life story of kind of understanding who she is. And sociopath and psychopath are not the same thing, by the way. So it's an interesting distinction, but just
Mm.
someone who has a sociopathic, attributes and personality and how they get through life and not having empathy and what that's like and having to train themselves to be caring and kind and, things that are harder naturally. So I find memoirs and books that are about the inner workings of our brain really fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that was
I do.
good.
I do as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you might like it. It's really good. And
Mm.
then the last one, Marriage Portrait. I also really like, I only really like fiction when it kind of puts itself somewhere in history, and it's this Marriage Portrait is set in the Renaissance around in the Medici family, and it was about it's kind of a, I don't know how much would be fiction and how much would be true, but it's a real figure, a 13-year-old bride. In real life, she was a
Mhm.
13-year-old bride to bring the houses together, the Medici house and another house. The Medici were they were the first bankers, I think, and huge art patrons and very involved with the Vatican. But if you know art history and Renaissance history, the Medici family is huge. But this young girl, Lucretia, was forced into marriage. They often married at a young age, but she was forced at a very young age. As soon as she got her period, they were waiting on her to get her period so she could be married. And because her older sister had died and couldn't take this marriage place, so she took
Mhm.
it for her to bring in the House of Ferrara into the family as well. But it's taught from, or it's written from a perspective of facts and then also an embellishment of course, her mind landscape through this process. And I found it really heart-wrenching and just beautiful and really
Yeah.
beautifully written. But I liked the constant references to history and art throughout. So it's excellent.
Yeah. That's excellent. Thanks for those three recommendations of
Sure.
books. And then embroidery with Aurifil, sort of not having a plan and just drawing on fabric and just going for it.
Yes. My new favorite. I just finally got myself comfortable and familiar with the 8-weight fabric, which is, or
Mhm.
sorry, the 8-weight thread, which is even thicker than the 12-weight, which I use for hand quilting. And I thought, this is probably thick enough for embroidery. Like one strand
Mhm.
of this 8-weight coming off the spool is about the same as like maybe 3 to 4 strands if you're using a 6-strand floss. And
Right.
I get a little tired of separating floss.
Yeah. Yes.
So I thought I would do an embroidery piece and I love it. So I've done some projects with them and yeah, it's one of those things, like crochet or like as soon as you need to do one thing for work, you really need to get yourself to the couch to crochet. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Totally.
And that's how I'm
Totally.
feeling about the embroidery right now at the 8-weight. I was like, do I need to finish this pattern editing or do I need to start another embroidery?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Exactly.
addicted at the moment.
That's great. And then online gardening lessons at this is floretteflowers.com, which I've
Yes.
never heard of.
LauretteFlower.com. She is an incredible educator, has lots of content out there. I grew my first garden from seed this summer that started in February, and I nerded out big time, and I loved it. But there is just so much really good support that she has of videos. In fact, she's even got like some, I think, Emmy winning or nominated like documentary videos that started at the Magnolia Network, and I think now they
Hmm.
produce them on their own, but just of like her little story of starting a farm and um, cultivating and kind of saving flower varieties that we're losing because everything's coming
Mm,
from overseas. So she's really trying
right.
to put more flowers into the world is her mission, which I love. So
Yeah. And part of your mission as well in a different way.
that is, but
Yeah.
like I finally, like traveling and photographing gardens from England to Australia is wonderful, but there's nothing like walking outside and capturing what the bumblebees are doing today. So I'm really trying to I'm designing the fabrics from seed now, you could say.
Yeah, oh,
So
I love that. Oh my gosh, that
yeah.
is the best note to end on. That is
Yeah.
wonderful. So,
Yeah.
Anna Maria, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time to be
you.
on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. It was great talking to
It's
you.
an utter pleasure. Thank you very much, Abby.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today's episode was brought to you by Craftsy. Calling all crafters, are you ready to dive deep into your favorite crafting projects and learn new techniques along the way? Then it's time to join Craftsy Premium Membership. Take advantage of this Black Friday deal. For only $1.49, you'll receive a full year of access to expert-led tutorials, patterns, and projects in every category you can imagine. With a massive library of resources at your fingertips, you'll be able to create your best work yet and bring your crafting dreams to life. Don't wait. Sign up now at craftsyoffers.com and discover the endless possibilities of Craftsy Premium Membership. Thank you so much, Craftsy. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. When you become a member of Craft Industry Alliance, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. Join us at craftindustrｙalliance.org. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.